The Bible and Art by Satyendra. Canonical Western art is biblical art. The Bible permeates Western culture. For centuries, all of Western cultural output has been viewed and interpreted through a Judeo-Christian lens, including non-biblical art and the art of other cultures. The power and influence of biblical art has ebbed and flowed relative to Christian tradition, the evolution of its theology, its primacy in Western culture, its political influence, geographic reach, and now its status in a secular world. It is important to note that whilst artistic expression is universal, art is a Western category of that expression. Biblical imagery became art during the Renaissance, and art was, and remains, inherently a tradable commodity. Belshazzar's Feast by Rembrandt retains value even in secular times because it is art before it is religious, and because the artist is more important than the subject. Art is a vast category of human expression. In this lecture, we will concentrate on the icon. The image. But before the icon, there was Judaic aniconism. Aniconism is the prohibition and absence of material representations in the worship of a deity, whether anthropomorphic, human, or theriomorphic, animal. Professor Jill Middlemass provides an excellent study of Judaic aniconism in her book The Divine Image. She argues that the use and prohibition of imagery in the Hebrew tradition was fluid to begin with, but was solidified by the prophets out of fidelity to Mosaic law and motivated by a desire to distinguish ancient Israel from its neighbors. She cites the second commandment, "You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them." Exodus 20. Middlemass cites an article by scholar Robert Carroll, who listed 6 reasons to explain Judaic aniconism. First, Yahweh is an invisible God. Secondly, to distinguish ancient Israel from other nations. Third, to prevent the magical manipulation of Yahweh. Fourth, as a reaction against the theriomorphic cults of Egypt. Fifth, Yahweh as a God of nature could not be represented visually. And finally, the closest image of Yahweh is a human, not a statue. Not all imagery was prohibited. We know that Moses set a bronze serpent on a pole and that the people established the golden calf. There is even a debate as to whether a statue of Yahweh stood in the first temple. There is a reference to such an idol in Isaiah 6. The early traditions of the Pentateuch suggest the possibility of the use of divine symbols for Yahweh's presence, but the later Deuteronomistic tradition is explicit about the prohibition and absence of images. Then Yahweh spoke to you out of the fire. You heard the sounds of words, but saw no form. Since you saw no form when Yahweh spoke to you at Horeb out of the fire, take care, so that you do not act corruptly by making an idol for yourselves. Deuteronomy 4 and 15. Scandinavian scholar Tryggve Mettinger states, to judge by the evidence, the polemic against images began with the prophet Hosea, received its peripety in Deuteronomy and the Deuteronomistic historical work, and its finale in Deutero-Isaiah. Mettinger refers to the book of Hosea 8. With their silver and gold they make idols for themselves to their own destruction. And he refers to the polemic against idols in Isaiah 44. All who make idols are nothing, and the things they treasure are worthless. Those who would speak up for them are blind, they are ignorant to their own shame. Who shapes a god and casts an idol which can profit nothing? People who do that will be put to shame. Such craftsmen are only human beings. Let them all come together and take their stand. They will be brought down to terror and shame. Isaiah 44. So aniconism was both law and practice, and would remain so for centuries to come. even during and after the life of Jesus of Nazareth. The second commandment remained the primary justification for continued aniconism amongst early Christians. Another deterrent was the fact that the Roman emperor was considered a living god, and the public worship of a new god would be fatal. The Council of Elvira in 306 announced that the hanging of paintings in churches shall be forbidden, since the object of veneration and worship does not belong on a wall. Resistance remained even after Constantine confirmed Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire in 313, but not without pushback. The pressure against aniconism intensified until the 6th century, when Bishop Hypatius of Ephesus conceded the use of images for the illiterate. The idea of the Bible of the poor can be traced back to this decision. Graydon Snyder states, any study of non-literary Christianity must begin with signs and symbols. Snyder identified several recurring signs and symbols used by early Christians: the lamb, the anchor, the vase, the dove, boat, branch, the orant, the palm, bread, the good shepherd, the vine and grapes, and the fish. Snyder concludes that all the early symbols stress victory, peace, and security in the face of adversity. There is no place for a crucified Christ or a symbol of divine death. But the use of imagery was about to face more than a century of sustained attack. The Byzantine period was difficult for Christian imagery. In 726, Emperor Leo III removed images from public places. His son Constantine V continued the prohibition, as did his successor Leo IV. But when he died in 780, his wife Irene reinstated the cult of images. In 787, the Council of Nicaea supported her. 2.5 decades later, in 813, Leo V reinstated prohibition against images, which would stay in place until 843, when Empress Theodora affirmed the Council of Nicaea. The Cludov Psalter from the 9th century shows iconoclasm in action. Over the centuries, a variety of objections to imagery were made, and scholars and theologians responded with a variety of justifications for their use. Proponents of the second commandment were told that images were a visual record of Christ's appearance in the flesh. Those who argued that there was a risk of the beholder mistaking the image for what it depicted were reassured that images of the emperor on sale in the marketplace while the emperor was in his palace did not mean two emperors existed. Those who argued that Christ's divinity inhibited his description and visualization were told that the human life of Christ had a reality that the image as a likeness witnessed. Others who asked how God could reveal himself by images in addition to his word were presented with Plato's theory of forms. The image, they argued, originated in an archetype, which it simply mirrored. John of Damascus explained that the image is a likeness that expresses the archetype in such a way that there is always a difference between the two. Finally, in 869, the war was won. The synod announced that we prescribe that the icons of our Lord are to be venerated and shown the same honour as is accorded to the books of the Gospels. So likewise do all, the knowing and the ignorant, draw benefit from the pictorial effects of the paint. If therefore a man does not do homage to the icon of Christ, he also shall not be able to recognize his form at the second coming. The late Byzantine and medieval periods saw the image evolve into a tangible presence of the holy. They allowed what was not there to become present and be experienced, and experienced repeatedly. Ownership of images was a sign of piety. The icon was central to private devotional practice. Owners of icons believed their image spoke to them. The colours and composition had theological symbolism. Red was the colour of the divine. Blue signified humanity. The Icon of Sinai by anonymous painter. The Trinity by Andrei Rublev. Theotokos of Thikvin by anonymous painter. With the advent of the printing press, the printed Bible allowed image and text to reinforce each other. But once again, Christian imagery was about to face another explosive challenge. The seeds of the Protestant Reformation can be traced back to 1517 and Martin Luther's 95 Theses. Amongst the list of complaints was the use of imagery. It was argued that images had been imbued with too much meaning and power. The excess nudity of the Mannerism period was distasteful. Though Protestants were divided over the use of images, iconoclasm returned. To destroy images demonstrated their impotence and was a direct challenge to the Roman Church. German scholar Hans Belting summarizes that the mocking of images was sometimes more important than their removal. Paintings were defaced. Statues and sculptures were smashed. Churches were stripped bare of religious iconography, and then another unexpected threat to the cult of images emerged. The rediscovery of classical Greek philosophy led to the radical evolution of many creative disciplines. Painting was given the status of a science. Imagery became subject to the laws of nature. The use of perspective altered compositional style and produced never-before-seen realism. Painting became the preserve of celebrated artists. Mythological narratives were visualized in ways never seen before. The artist's imagination was freed from the technical constraints of the medieval period. And it wasn't long before religious painting became a fashionable genre too. The holy image became a work of art. The static icon was replaced by biblical narratives. Artistic execution was more important than sacred presence. The holy image was at risk of being crushed under the weight of art. Something had to be done. The Catholic Church responded spectacularly. The Council of Trent reiterated the importance of the veneration of images. The nudity and distortions that had become popular in 16th century Mannerism were outlawed. Michelangelo's Last Judgment had caused much offence because of nudity and male genitalia and a beardless Christ. Daniel de Volterra was hired to paint fig leaves and breechcloths to cover up the offending visuals. Paolo Veronese was given 3 months to clean up his painting of the Last Supper, which was accused of featuring buffoons, drunks, and dwarves. But rather than undo his work, he simply changed the title to Banquet in the House of Levi, and no more was said. The medium of art was harnessed to promote the church's message, doctrine, and theology. Vast quantities of art were commissioned for presentation in customized chapels and framed and mounted on altars. Wealthy and powerful men became patrons of artists and art collectors. The cult of the image was born anew. The Counter-Reformation was responsible for some of the greatest Western art ever made. Annunciation by El Greco. The Immaculate Conception by Bartolome Murillo. The Adoration of the Shepherds by Bartolome Murillo. Christ Healing the Blind by El Greco. The Marriage Feast at Cana by Bartolome Murillo. The Raising of Lazarus by Rembrandt. The Taking of Christ by Caravaggio. Ecce Homo by Titian. The Deposition by Tintoretto. The Incredulity of St. Thomas by Caravaggio. Coronation of the Virgin by Diego Velázquez. La Gloria by Titian. Daniel in the Lion's Den by Rubens. Samson and Delilah by Anthony van Dyck. The Sacrifice of Isaac by Caravaggio. Moses Breaking the Tablets of the Law by Rembrandt. Return of the Prodigal Son by Rembrandt. The Stigmatization of St. Francis by El Greco. The Martyrdom of St. Sebastian by Francisco de Zurbarán. Agnus Dei by Francisco de Zurbarán. Colonialism exported Christianity around the world. The Portuguese and British went to India. The French, the Dutch, and the British again went to Africa. The Spanish colonized South America. Indigenous populations were brutally converted. Art was used as a didactic educational tool. Peru, the former capital of the Inca Empire, became a center for religious painting. The Cusco school taught European artistic techniques. Our Lady of Bethlehem by anonymous painter. Adoration of the Magi by anonymous painter. The Last Supper by Marcos Zapata has a guinea pig for the meal. Syncretism between the Christian faith and pre-Hispanic religions also emerged. Paintings known as Ángel Arcabuceros depicted angels with an arquebus, an early muzzle-loaded firearm, instead of the sword traditional for martial angels. The angels were dressed in clothing inspired by Andean nobles and aristocrats. The Enlightenment brought secularization. Religious art fell out of fashion. Art moved on to other themes. Romanticism and transcendentalism focused on spirituality rather than religion. Several artists did produce religious art in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, though little of it has been added to the canon. Madonna and Child by Enrique Monserda Vidal. The Song of the Angels by Alphonse Bouguereau. The Flagellation of Christ by Alphonse Bouguereau. Virgin of the Lilies by Alphonse Bouguereau. Virgin and Infant Jesus and John the Baptist by Alphonse Bouguereau. Virgin of Consolation by Alphonse Bouguereau. Pieta by Alphonse Bouguereau. Moses and the Burning Bush by Marc Chagall. White Crucifixion by Marc Chagall. Abraham and the Three Angels by Marc Chagall. We have seen that biblical art serves four functions: educational, devotional, theological, and ideological. What once dominated Western culture has now become a niche genre, synonymous with the declining hegemony of the secularized West.